Over the Nile, there has always been enough time for memory to turn events into symbols. Yet sometimes a symbol is born almost at once, as if carved straight from the air. Kadesh is such a case. On Egyptian temple walls, it appears as the instant when Ramses II, lit by the favor of the gods, rides alone into the heart of the enemy's surge and restores balance to the world. In Hittite annals, it is the day when a southern army faltered before city walls, and King Muwatalli II held the knot of Syria. Between these two pictures lies the plain by the Orontes, broad and dusty, with a river glinting through reeds. There was no room there for a clean fairy tale. There were scouting errors, cold calculations, sudden terror, and at the same time astonishing endurance. What remained was not only reliefs, but a shadow and diplomacy, in school texts of scribes, in later legends that outlived the kingdoms themselves. We will not rush to a verdict of victory or defeat. We are after something else. How two Bronze Age superpowers found themselves on opposite sides of one crossing. What forced them to stake everything, and why here, far from their heartlands, they first felt that power has an edge. This story is about how dust in the throat can change the course of empires as surely as a sword. When we read royal inscriptions, it is easy to imagine battle lines as diagrams, but behind every sign stands a living person, a charioteer driving a pair of horses under arrows for the first time, a scout who did not distinguish a trap from truth in time, a scribe who records rations and later records the names of the dead. Kadesh teaches us to see human fragility inside great politics. That is why it deserves an attentive telling, never loud, always clear. Picture the morning quiet before a storm. The camp still smells of bread and smoke, the river of coolness, and somewhere beyond the low ridge foreign chariots already stand harnessed. That invisible tension is our first step into the journey. We are in the 13th century BCE, in the time historians call the Late Bronze Age. The Eastern Mediterranean then was tied together by trade routes and dynastic marriages. Ships carried copper from Cyprus, silver from Anatolia, cedar from Lebanon. Caravans crossed valleys, and every city on their path was both market and fortress. Egypt in this world is a river state, where everything obeys the cycle of the Nile. In palaces and temples, granaries, courts, and papyrus archives keep the kingdom alive. On the throne sits Ramses II of the 19th dynasty, energetic, attentive to glory, and still eager to prove that the legacy of his father Seti I has not weakened. Opposing him is the Hittite Empire rising in the northern lands of Anatolia. Its king, Muwatalli II, rules from Hattusa, yet the real reach of his house runs far south through the vassal principalities of Syria. The meeting of these empires is not a random clash of honor. It is the collision of two systems, two ways of holding space, two ideas of who may call himself guardian of order between sea and desert. The key artery of the north is not the Nile, but the Orontes, a river threading basalt hills and Syrian plains. Along its bends stand cities like beads holding the trade strings. Among them, Kadesh is a fortified height with ditch and inner palace, overlooking crossings and roads to Damascus and Aleppo. For Egyptians, it is the gate to Asia, for Hittite the latch on the southern frontier. Besides the two kings, there are dozens of smaller rulers, Amurru, Ugarit, Karchemish, and the nomadic Shesu, no mere extras, because their choices of loyalty or betrayal decide where a border will lie. Both empires rely on chariot forces, an elite that fights swiftly and costs the state dearly. A chariot then was like a modern ship or armored vehicle. It joined craft, economy, and prestige. When chariots move, fates of kingdoms move with them. Around Kadesh, those fates will converge so tightly that a single day will weigh more than years of skirmishing, and we will follow them step by step. Before the battle, the sky is still clear, but political pressure has already gathered. For centuries, Egypt pushed beyond the Nile into the north, seeking timber for ships, metals for workshops, and a buffer against nomad raids. Under Thutmose III and Amenhotep II, Syrian cities paid tribute to the pharaoh, yet after internal crises and the religious upheavals of Akhenaten, that control slackened. The Hittite state seized the opening. Kings such as Suppiluliuma I and his heirs subdued Carchemish, drew many principalities under their hand, and built a treaty web where a vassal swore not only by arms, but by hostages and marriage ties. Small border states learned to survive by balancing. They sent gifts both to Thebes and to Hattusa, knowing that tomorrow another banner might stand on their gates. The sorest link in this system was Amurru, a coastal land near Byblos and Ugarit. Its ruler Bendishina first served the Hittites, but Egyptian envoys offered him support and wider autonomy. When Amurru shifted to Egypt, Muwatalli saw a direct threat. The loss opened a road inward and could tug other wavering cities after it. Ramses had his own constraints. His reign was still firming, and he could not afford long uncertainty on the northern edge. He had to show temples, soldiers, and vassals that Egypt was reclaiming the paths of the ancestors. At the same time, he knew that each day of marching meant grain eaten far from home and horses tiring on alien roads. The campaign had to be swift and bright. Such was the knot. Hutti sought to keep Syria, Egypt to regain it, and local princes to live between. Kadesh was the lock on the door. The city stood on a rise, ringed by water and marshland, and its walls had weathered more than one siege. Roads met there. From Kadesh one could command the Orontes ford and watch caravans moving toward Canaan. Whoever sat in Kadesh spoke for all southern Syria. Both kings therefore saw in it not so much a city as proof of the right to rule. When in spring Ramses marched there with 4 divisions, he marched toward the sharpest stake of his early reign. Preparation in Egypt looks like the labor of a vast machine. In Memphis and Pyramus, smiths melt bronze, pour it into stone molds, cool it, polish it, and stamp it with the king's sign. In carpenters' yards they fit chariot spokes. Each must endure stones and sudden turns. Leatherworkers soak harness straps in fat, so they will not crack under Syrian heat. In stables they choose horses, strong, yes, but also steady, able to face glittering weapons and the scream of battle. Scribes walk the granaries with tablets and reed pens, counting barley, dried dates, salted fish, setting rations for man and beast, because distant war is first of all arithmetic. The army gathers into 4 great divisions named for gods: Ammonius, Ra, Ta, and Seth. These are not mere titles, but a way to keep order on the move. Each division holds thousands of infantry with shields and spears, companies of archers, and the chariotry, an aristocratic elite wearing light-scale armor and carrying daggers often passed from father to son. Before departure, priests pass along the ranks, sprinkling weapons with sacred water and speaking protection over them. Beside them stand practical men, scouts who know every well on the road, engineers carrying ropes and wooden stakes for bridges, physicians packing resin and honey for bandages. The army moves like a city on feet. Behind come packed donkeys with tents, poles, and grinding mortars for grain. Ramses watches this stream and sees not only strength but expectation. Everyone knows that in the north the pharaoh will win either glory or shame. He chooses speed. In the first weeks the army marches with little rest, so the enemy cannot fully gather. Messengers ride ahead to allied towns. Egypt has returned. Speed is a risk, but also his calculation. The earlier he reaches Kadesh, the less chance Hutti has to shape a coalition. Thus the march begins that will bring him to the narrow edge between courage and overconfidence. The road north is not a triumphant procession, however later poems may paint it. Sun glares off pale stony valleys, dust settles on lips, and every halt becomes a brief struggle for shade. At times chariots stick in dry stream beds, and soldiers, muttering under breath, shove wheels with their shoulders. Camps bake bread on hot stones and boil barley porridge while drivers clear sand from horses' nostrils. Still Ramses keeps the pace. The farther he moves from the Nile, the stronger the urge to finish with one clean blow. By the time he reaches Syria, the army is already a rumor that outruns its own feet. Cities send bread and beer, but their rulers look wary, remembering how great kings' promises shift like wind over the sea. When Egyptians enter the Orontes Valley, the air grows moister and vineyards appear on the slopes. Kadesh is now within sight, its walls dark above green floodplains. Here patrols bring two nomads to the pharaoh. They say Muwatalli stands far away near Aleppo and fears meeting Egypt. The report sounds plausible. A nomad might know steppe gossip. Ramses accepts it and advances with the Ammonius division, leaving Ra and Tas several days behind. He wants to reach Kadesh before the city gains help. Speed becomes his ally, soon as test. The Egyptian camp rises on open ground northwest of the city. Soldiers drive stakes, stretch canvas, set wagons in a circle like a small wooden rampart. Under the royal tent, they unroll a map of leather strips. Officers argue about approaches to the ford. Horses are watered, weapons stacked for rest, because all assume, tomorrow a siege, the next day surrender. Even tired jokes pass among the tents. No one sees that on the far bank of the Orontes a foreign army already waits, its wheels stirring behind reeds. The camp's calm is short, but that brief confidence will make the blow sharper still. The nomads questioned in the royal tent were Hittite agents. Muwatalli too was not near Aleppo. He had long since positioned himself behind Kadesh, assembling one of the largest coalitions of his time. Under his banners stood warriors from many lands, princes of Carchemish and Alalak, contingents from Arzawa, troops from the far west, and even those who disliked Hittite came because they feared Egypt's return more. The army camped on the eastern bank of the Orontes where low ridges hide it, and the river waters the horses. There were thousands of chariots, heavier than Egypt's. An Egyptian chariot is light and two-man, built for archery at speed. The driver holds the team. The archer showers arrows while the vehicle turns almost like a dancer. The Hittite chariot is different, wider, sturdier, often carrying 3 men, driver, shield-bearer, and spearman or swordsman. Its power lies in the ramming strike that shatters infantry order and pushes an enemy toward river or rampart. Muwatalli placed his chariots to hit suddenly and break Egypt in pieces before the divisions joined. He waited for this precise moment. Ramses arriving proud of his fast march, exposed with only one division in the field. The night before battle in the Hittite camp is quiet yet taut. Straps are checked twice, horse manes braided, and on warriors' chests shine badges marked with their prince's seals. When scouts confirm the Egyptian camp standing open, the king signals. The dark wave of chariots rolls toward the crossing. For the Egyptians, Hittite's presence is still invisible. Dust has settled behind hills, and Kadesh's walls block the eastern view. Thus the trap works. The enemy seems far, hands relax. Muwatalli intends not merely a strong first blow, but a humiliating one. So wavering Syrian cities will see that Egypt can be stopped. He is not seeking a handsome duel. He is seeking broken will. The chariots will not charge a ready army, but strike when the camp still rests in imagined safety. That moment comes at dawn. The first impact falls on the RA division approaching the camp along a narrow riverside road. The troops march in column. Infantry mixed with wagons, provisions, repair carts. Chariots roll ahead and beside, but with wide gaps. Suddenly Hittite teams burst from behind the ridges. Hooves hammer hard ground, wheels fling stones, and the noise swells like thunder on a clear day. The Egyptian column cannot lock shields. Men see only bronze flash and broad Hittite shields rising above the wheels. The first chariots crash into the flank, knocking the column off the road. Spearmen stab downward, shield bearers cover them from arrows, and the mass of horses drives on. Some fall, others drop their loads and run into the fields, but the fields are already sliced by wheels. Dust rises in a thick veil where it is hard to tell officer from enemy. Commands vanish under the roar of beasts and human cries. A few Egyptian chariots attempt a counterstroke, yet heavier Hittite machines shove them aside. In minutes the march becomes a wave of fugitives rolling toward the Ammonius camp, bringing not only fear but Hittite chariots at their heels. When the first Hittites enter the Egyptian wagon circle, everything happens at once. Tent ropes snap, cooking fires scatter, pack donkeys bolt. Soldiers who had just laid weapons down seize shields and stand where they can, often without formation. The Hittite wave pours through the camp, aiming for the royal tent and the head of the army itself. This is not only a tactical success, but a psychological blow, because in the Bronze Age an army depends on the king's presence. If he dies or is taken, the campaign collapses. For a heartbeat, it seems the trap has worked perfectly. In that heartbeat, Ramses must become the storm's center. Ramses has no time for long thought. He sees the camp unraveling and knows that without a controlled core, nothing will save the trailing divisions. Around him gather the royal guard, a tight knot of charioteers, and a few hundred infantry still holding order. Officers raise the Ammonius standard so it can be seen through the haze. Ramses mounts his chariot. His driver Mena draws the reins until the horses stand like coiled springs. Quiet strings build up. The pharaoh drives toward the densest enemy mass because he must be visible. Otherwise, fear will dissolve faster than any blade. He shouts not of vengeance, but of order. Hold by the banner. Do not fight alone. The charioteers form a small, moving ring along the Orontes bank. Light Egyptian vehicles turn sharply, and they use this gift, striking Hittite flanks, shooting from close range, withdrawing at once before the heavier chariots can force a ramming fight. Infantry gathers in rough bands, shields tight, archers firing over shoulders into the onrush. In the chaos, Ramses also fulfills a ritual role, calling on Ammonius. For Egyptians, war is the restoration of Ma'at as much as technique. Yet prayer stands beside practice. He reads the ground and leads his men where the enemy is squeezed between river and camp. He is not alone, but his presence keeps a living center. Gradually, the Hittite push slows as scattered terror in the camp hardens into a line. Several times Hittite chariots try to circle behind him, but Egyptian guards drive them off, buying each other space. Ramses' horses foam, their flanks dark with sweat, but they hold pace. He catches sight of Ra's shattered troops still fighting at the camp edge and sends runners to gather them into a new order. It is a small act that changes much. When a soldier sees command still moving and being obeyed, he stops being a crowd. Thus Ramses wins what matters most. Time for the rest of his army to reach the field. The Hittite assault was brilliantly timed, yet even brilliance meets a human weakness no king fully commands. As the vanguard storms the camp, it sees not only enemies but the wealth of a great monarch, gilded chariot fittings, bright officers' cloaks, chests of fine weapons. Many charioteers, sure victory is sealed, scatter to seize trophies. They stop, climb down, unhitch captured horses, quarrel over loot. The impulse is understandable. A Bronze Age warrior earned honor and fortune by what he carried home. But on a battlefield it means lost momentum. The Hittite wave that should have rolled as one front becomes clusters scattered among tents and wagons. They no longer see one another, no longer hear common signals, and their heavy chariots need space to regain speed. Ramses notices the break and acts without hesitation. He drives his chariotry along the Orontes where ground narrows and forces the enemy to bunch. Light Egyptian teams strike the flanks, cut off looters from the main body, and push them back toward the ford. Archers work as a unit. In tight lanes, every arrow finds a mark without needless heroics. Hittite charioteers who felt triumphant a moment earlier suddenly notice their ranks cannot close, and the way back is dangerous. The fight shifts into a contest not of numbers, but of who can recover shape first. Muwatalli watches from across the river, having kept his royal person safe. He sends signals to reform, but dust and noise blunt them. Part of his chariot force, pressing to the ford, jams against river banks and its own rear groups. A crush forms among reeds where sheer mass no longer helps. Ramses advances step by step, not chasing too far, but pushing the enemy out of the camp. The slow pressure undercuts the whole Hittite plan to destroy Egypt's center before the rest arrived. Yet Ramses knows holding the camp is not enough. One division cannot long withstand an entire coalition. The sound he listens for is not the clash of weapons, but the distant rumble of marching feet. By late afternoon, the Ta division appears from the south, men limping from forced pace, but intact. Officers drive them straight into battle without rest. Fresh Ta chariots sweep around the camp and enter from the left, striking Hittite groups already cut off from command. Their blow is not as sudden as the morning ambush, but it is precise. They hit the rear of those still looting or retreating in disorder. Almost at the same moment, allied troops, the Egyptian texts call the Naaran, arrive from the west, likely warriors of Amuru and Canaan loyal to Ramses, out of calculation and fear. They appear in time like a door closing behind a fugitive. The Hittite chariots, once free to maneuver, now find themselves between two fronts. The river presses from one side, the camp and new divisions from the other. The battle's tone changes. Instead of a wild breakthrough, it becomes a series of tight struggles where each crew thinks not of glory, but of escape. The Hittite advance loses its last chance at decisive triumph. Ramses quickly orders his men not to scatter in pursuit, but to hold a dense line by the ford. He knows Muwatalli still has reserves beyond the river, and reckless chasing would reopen a flank. Egyptian charioteers rotate in links so horses do not drop from exhaustion. Ta infantry secures the camp perimeter, stacking wagons into new barricades. Seeing that pressure no longer comes as a single wave, Hittite teams begin withdrawing toward Kadesh's bridges. Some make it back, some bog down in the crush, but the direction is one: disengage before the fight turns to disaster. Slowly the field clears of enemies, and the exhausted Egyptians feel, for the first time that day, that they have survived. Survival, however, is not the same as final victory. Evening settles over the plain like a sea after storm. Ramses has gathered his divisions, yet he faces a hard truth. Kadesh is not taken, and the Hittite army across the river is not broken. Muwatalli has preserved much of his infantry and many chariots in reserve. He had not thrown them into the morning charge, trusting the vanguard to finish the work. Now he sees a formed Egyptian front and does not risk a second assault. Egyptian officers confer by the royal tent. A storming of Kadesh would require time, siege gear, and fresh strength. After a day in which the best charioteers fought without pause, such strength is gone. They could try to force the river, but would give the enemy height and defense, and risk losing chariots in the shallows. Ramses understands his main aim: not to raise the city at any cost, but to show Egypt is unbroken. He holds the field another day as a statement, then orders withdrawal. Muwatalli does not pursue. He has repelled the siege and shaken Egypt's prestige, yet he will not gamble in a long fight where his coalition might fray. Envoys pass between camps with formal words of strength and peace, while each king counts what he can still risk. The battle ends not with a sharp chord, but with a heavy pause. In the Egyptian camp, no celebration follows. Fires are kept low. Fuel is for the road home. Men sit in clusters wrapped in cloaks, listening for any renewed rumble of wheels. Horses lower their heads. Grooms loosen bridles, rub tired backs, murmur calming words. In Kadesh, the city likewise keeps watch under double-barred gates. Both sides know dawn could bring another clash, or an ordered retreat. That choice hangs in the air thicker than smoke. At sunrise, it is not swords but judgment that decides. Both kings feel the weight of it. For ordinary people, the consequences of Kadesh are immediate. There is no ceremonial music, only thirst, shaking hands, and fatigue that sits on shoulders heavier than bronze. Repairers work by torchlight, straightening bent axles, reseating rims, tightening harnesses, because a chariot may be needed again tomorrow. Physicians and priests move among tents, binding wounds with linen, smearing them with honey and resin, speaking softly so panic does not rise. Water in skins is warm and cloudy, yet every swallow is counted. Stretcher-bearers, swapping weapons for poles, carry comrades into shade. Scribes, the same men who yesterday wrote rations on papyrus, now sit on the ground and write the names of the missing. Their tablets gleam with wax and firelight, while nearby lie broken arrows and crushed spearheads that must be tallied before departure. In every Egyptian household that sent a son north, after Kadesh there will be an empty corner, and that emptiness is as real as any diplomatic boundary. Syrian villagers in nearby hamlets watch battered wagons drag through fields and soldiers take grain by royal order or not. For them the battle means ruined gardens, crops trampled by horses, and dread of which tax collector will come next spring. They do not write poems, yet their experience is the first and sharpest consequence of a great war. In the camp, quiet talk turns to how close death came, and how strange it is that the sun will rise again. Older soldiers tell the young that the most frightening moment in battle is when you cannot hear a command. Priests burn small offerings before the standards, returning reverence that might have vanished in chaos. A few horses that fled during the assault wander back on their own, guided by the camp scent, and people greet them like living witnesses of luck. Over all of this lies the Orontes' strange calm. The river runs as if it knows nothing of human titles. It reminds both armies that they are guests in a foreign land. When morning comes, that thought travels with them. Ramses organizes the withdrawal south with care. Chariots ride ahead. Infantry keeps tight columns so Hittite is not tempted to pursue. At Egypt's border, the army is welcomed as victors. There is no other story the state can afford. The pharaoh returns with what matters most, prestige intact. Now begins a second battle, the battle for memory. In Thebes, Karnak, Luxor, and the new royal residence Pyramus, reliefs are carved and poems composed. The most famous will be the poem of Pintor, an exalted text in which the pharaoh describes himself as standing alone against thousands of chariots while his men fled in fear. Ammonius is praised as the god who placed strength and cold courage in the king's hands. The scenes are repeated on temple walls across Egypt so that anyone who comes for festival or tribute will see the same interpretation. They show the turning moment. Ramses on his chariot with only a few faithful near him, and before him a shattered foe. In stone, this becomes not merely a story but proof of rightful rule. Why insist so fiercely on one day? Because Egypt's empire rests on belief that the pharaoh guarantees Ma'at. Syrian princes follow news not out of curiosity, but to decide whom to serve tomorrow. Had Kadesh sounded like defeat, many would have crossed to Hittite at once. Stone therefore speaks with political voice. Egypt did not yield. In state archives, scribes count trophies, draft loss reports, and allot rewards to those who held their ground. These dry records are not for temple walls, but they show the cost paid for legend. Ramses builds more temples, strengthens borders, and sends envoys back into Syria, leaning on his own narrative like a shield. Thus, a battle that was ambiguous on the field becomes a victory in memory, one that steadies the empire for years. Memory is another front, and Ramses commands it. If we step away from the temple walls and look at the map, Kadesh hardly shifts it right away. The city remains in the Hittite sphere, southern Syria stays contested, and Amurru will be bargained over again. Still, deeper changes take root. Both states feel the limits of their strength. Egypt learns that a rapid march can split an army faster than the enemy can. Hittite learns that even a well-placed ambush cannot guarantee the annihilation of a foe far from home. These lessons are not abstract. In later years, Ramses campaigns again in Syria, but more cautiously, reinforcing garrisons and leaning on diplomacy. The Hittite kingdom has troubles too. Casca raids in the north, instability in the west with Achaean seafarers, and dynastic tension at home. Both courts begin to value stability as much as conquest. Letters between them grow more frequent. A new note appears, a wary recognition that the world between Euphrates and Nile needs a balance of two powers rather than the domination of one. After Muwatalli's death and brief internal turmoil, Hattusili III takes the Hittite throne. Under him, around 1259 BCE, a peace treaty is concluded with Ramses. Its text survives in Egyptian hieroglyphs at Karnak and in clay tablets from Hattusa. The agreement recognizes spheres of influence, promises mutual aid against outside enemies, and provides for returning fugitives, an unusually formal, almost modern document for its age. Soon peace is reinforced by marriage. A Hittite princess travels to Egypt and becomes Ramses' wife, bringing gifts, horses, and correspondence that speaks of mutual respect without erasing rivalry. Kadesh, meant to be a key to foreign land, becomes a boundary stone in a shared order. The battle thus becomes a step toward the earliest known great international peace, born not from softness, but from the bitter knowledge of the Orontes plain. The line between myth and record at Kadesh is simple and stern. Ramses II did not destroy the Hittite army, and Muwatalli II did not capture Ramses. The most reliable evidence points to a costly draw that both courts declared a victory to save prestige. Yet sometimes a draw changes the world more than triumph. Egypt learns that empire rests not on a single charge, but on links between divisions, between granaries and roads. Hittite learns that trophies and lightning ambushes have limits. Both powers come to see the other not only as an enemy, but as a rival equal who must be lived beside. For later ages, Kadesh becomes a laboratory of memory. In Egypt, it is recited as proof of royal valor and as a lesson that the gods do not abandon the pharaoh even in a trap. In Hattusa, it is remembered as the stopping of a southern giant and the strength of chariot aristocracy. But behind both versions lies one shared truth. People on imperial frontiers lived in a world where a king's morning decision could change their lives. After the battle, those people still saw Egyptian and Hittite patrols on their roads, and between them local princes learning to speak to both languages of power. If we imagine the plain itself after the fighting, it does not resemble the carved drama. It looks more like a stage after the actors have left. Broken wheels lie in ruts like fallen circles of time. Torn harnesses dry on stakes. Near the water, lost bronze fittings glint in mud. Grooms lead tired horses to the river, and each steady breath of the animals seems to calm the men. Evening rises quietly over the Orontes, and the river that saw empires before this day and will see them after runs without haste. Far to the south, the Nile lifts again in flood, and in its delta new tax entries will be written, new temples raised, new children born who will grow up hearing the legend of Kadesh. Memory will make that legend grand, but the day itself remains human, a day when endurance and chance together held the thin thread of history.